So welcome back to the As Told by You podcast. Our guest today is arguably a legend in Columbia, especially. Has owned the Jam Room recording studio since
we
86?
started the first record we put out that was actually sold and such was in 88, so we kind of call it 88.
88. All right. So yes, Jay Matheson. And Jay and I have known each other a very long time. Band that I was in recorded at the Jam Room in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then we were in a band together for a little while. And so I've known Jay for a long time. And just so happens that Jay and I were talking the other day about microphones. He called to talk to me about microphones. And I was like, let's do the podcast. Test out the microphones. So, yeah, that's right. So welcome, Jay. Thanks for coming
Bill.
on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So talk to me about how did you get into this? Where in the world did you start recording music?
Well, as with a lot of these things, you kind of start when you're really young. I remember getting a little reel-to-reel tape recorder when I was very young for a Christmas present or something. I remember the first thing I remember recording was the theme from the Hawaii 5-0. You remember it had the really cool thing with the drum roll at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I actually put it up to the speaker, I recall, on the TV and actually recorded the Hawaii 5-0 theme. This is in the 60s, probably like 67, 68, 69,
right,
when I was very little. And so I actually learned how to work a tape machine when I was very young, because even then, back then, this is before cassettes, if you think about it. And so there was my very first thing. So then, as time went on, I just became interested in being a musician and got obsessed. Got my first Black Sabbath album when I was about 14 and all that. Got obsessed with music, and basically going to college and all was just something to do while I was trying to play music and playing in bands and all that. But then when I was in college, I was in media arts, and I took audio classes, and it just turns out that just by passively reading owner's manuals on home stereo equipment and all the equipment that I've been buying to play music with, that had amassed quite a bit of audio knowledge. So I was like a star student in the audio classes, and actually in those audio classes we had multi-track recorders, so I brought my band in, recorded the band. So that was about 1981 maybe, that I probably did my first multi-track recording on some school equipment at Media Arts.
Wow.
So that's my first time actually recording a band on like pro level gear. Of course, after school, I lost all access to stuff like that.
Yep.
Because, the ability to buy that equipment just didn't exist. It was thousands of dollars to have any kind of, multi-track tape machine and a console and all that sort of thing. So, nobody that I knew had access to that sort of equipment. So I just kept playing in bands and such. And then, but I has amassed a PA system, because back then you had to have a big PA system to go out and gig. Bars did not have house systems, and you couldn't show up with a small vocal PA and play. You had to have a big PA system, mic up the drums and all that. So I was amassing all of that while all of my bandmates and friends were spending all their money on drugs and alcohol. I was, spending all of my money on a mixing board, microphones, building speaker cabinets. And actually, I learned how to build speaker cabinets during that point, because, again, we didn't have any money. So that's what got me into the audio business. Some guy had seen some of the speaker cabinets I built and hired me to work as a kind of an installer for PA systems in churches. So the whole thing is a long, funky road. It's not like these days where somebody, buys a computer and an interface, start recording at their parents' house, and that sort of thing, or infrastructure didn't exist, because computers didn't really exist. And if they did, which I guess they really did exist.
Well, the software was so
right. You could do
rudimentary
graphics on it and word processing and obviously engineering stuff, but recording was not done on computers. And when the Jam Room started, there was no computer for like almost 10 years.
Wow. Wow. So you were recording onto tape and then editing the tape, basically.
Yeah, there was no editing to speak of it unless you wanted to get the razor
Once
blade
you get it out to actually cut it. Wow.
So it was all tape based. It was analog tape based. So the thing was, there was this kind of. One thing is also we didn't have access to money back then. You know, you didn't back then. You didn't get $3,000 credit cards when you graduated college. The first credit card I finally got, and I was probably 25 or something like that, and I've got my first credit card. It was at a $500 limit on it. So you can't. And like
Can't
even
get much
an
for that.
8-track tape machine at the time was $2,000. Any kind of mixing console was $2,000 or $3,000.
Oh, yeah.
So you have any access to this money or getting loans. There was no parents' house that had some big room that we could record in. I didn't have a house because I was poor. Just lived in some crappy apartment. So the whole thing is just, how did I get started? It's a long pathway. So I had all this equipment, and then at some point I did scrape up enough money to buy an 8-track tape machine, and I started fooling with that. Started sharing a space with some friends, and started making some recording. And I made the first Bachelors of Art record. And that record did very well, and that kind of put me, and people heard that record, and put me pretty much in the business of recording people after making that record. So that one record that I made, and it was probably one of the first commercially successful releases by a local band. So that kind of put me on the road. And at that point, I was in the audio business, but I was building speaker cabinets, building road cases, doing live sound.
Whatever it took to get it going.
I've been working for a long time as a live sound engineer. I was a house engineer at Rockefeller's, and I did freelance stuff. I was doing, on top of my regular day job, I do maybe as many as 20 gigs on top of my day job. So I was working weekends and, gigging with bands and doing live sound. So, I did not just decide to do it. I just kept working, doing live sound and recording, and eventually get enough to buy some studio monitors, get enough to buy a few pair of headphones, a headphone amplifier, and all these odds and ends. So it was just kind of a natural progression of things. And also when I went to work for ACS, I couldn't work as a freelance sound engineer anymore and haul a PA system around. So I had to quit doing that because that was a conflict of interest, because that's what they did for me. So I worked for them, but then so I just started, for my side gig, I switched from doing live sound to recording.
Nice.
So that was kind of the crux there.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard that story.
When did the jam room actually open then?
Well, I started in '88. I started actually recording bands. I was probably charging $10 an hour or something like that. Like I said, we were all poor, and but when it really started, it was probably more like '89. We actually moved into our first space. So our first space that was just ours or mine. I say ours because a couple of other, Greg Davis and Dave Allen also would come in and engineer on my equipment when I wasn't there, if they wanted to bring projects in. So my band, Bachelors of Art, moved into a space that was suitable to make a control room and a studio. So that was more like '89 when we actually moved into our first place. That's off of Hugh G, across from Stormwater Studios now.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It's a basement space that's hadn't been occupied since I left, as far as I know. So we were there from like '89 to about '92 when we moved into our current building. But we were still kind of an under the radar kind of business. We didn't have an actual business license or anything.
And there probably weren't that many studios in town at the time, right? Where there's Strawberry Skies still.
Well, Strawberry Skies was there, and I guess there were some other things going on, but those weren't typically what you would call accessible. Mm-hmm. And not to talk about them in specific, but there was no place that a band could go for an amount of money that they could just pool together and record a record. That place did not exist. You could go to Charlotte, you could go to Columbia, and there was no place a band with, even a couple of $1,000s could make a record.
Right.
And even if you made the record, there was no guarantee that it was going to be even listenable at all.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, when it comes right down to it, there was no, for bands, there was no recording at all available in Columbia where you could reliably go for even a stretch of affordable.
Yeah.
You'd have to have thousands and thousands of dollars, and then you're liable to come out with something so crappy that you wouldn't release it. I mean, I say that because it happened to me. Before I had a studio, I went somewhere to record. We saw in the state newspaper, it was an ad. The studio said $25 an hour. We said, we can do that. I was in a metal band called Tempest Fugit, and we recorded, this record, and it didn't sound good. We spent our money. We went to this place, and still that record has never come out. Now's
the time.
Yeah, and that
Pull
was
it back out, remaster it.
that was we don't have the master anymore. Time has gone on, and you got to figure this is a long time ago. Before we had real houses and things like that, we moved from apartment to apartment. Maybe people were still living with their parents. We didn't have places to keep stuff. We were all poor. You know what I mean? We drove old raggedy vehicles. We lived in crappy apartments, and there was no place. There's no attic or what.
Yeah.
So all these things even the first Bachelors of Art master got lost over time because I think it got left when I at ACS or something one time, and when I quit working there to go full time, I just never went back to get it.
So this intention to be accessible to people, this is a vibe that I feel like I've gotten from the Jam Room being there as often as I have been over the years. And I hadn't been in a while, but like for the amount of time that I was, where there was a high level of expertise. Like everybody, there was a lot of cool gear. There was a lot of like high-end processing and all of that stuff. But there was also a DIY feel to it. Like the feel was there. Like we're really making something cool together. It wasn't like the musicians would walk in and we know what we're doing, or you know what we're doing and we don't, or whatever it is. It was all very cooperative. That sounds like that was intentional, to make it accessible to people, to make it feel like not intimidating, so that you want to come there and do it.
Well, it was just a place that we could set up and record people, and the idea of when we started out, it was we had no money to build the place out to be very opulent. So I remember that the first carpet we had, a friend of mine, Scott Henley, actually, some elderly people were pulling some green shag out of their living room, and they never went to that. So for years we had green shag carpet because he pulled it out and just came over, and for $100 or something, they put all this carpet in, and everything there was just so, bare bones that there was no way to be feel like you were somewhere you weren't comfortable.
But I honestly love so much that like you would think. I love the idea that you're not as focused on the sort of fanciness of it as you are about just making really good sound. Right?
Yeah, definitely. It would be nice if the place looked fancier per se, and over the years we have made it look a lot nicer. We've remodeled it several times, painted it a lot of times.
There's a stone wall in the
back. But still, the everybody walks in and they say, "Oh yeah, this is where we want to be. This is a place you make music."
Yep.
And that vibe is there. But the very first recording we made, I remember this band Rear Window. They had a van. We went to the old place, got all the equipment, the tape machine and the console. We hauled it over to the new place, patched it in, and then same day started recording.
Wow. Holy moly.
I just hooked it all up. And, boom, we were recording same day. I mean, that's just completely unheard of. And it was, there was no big racks. I had a folding table, and the mixing board sat on one folding table, and a rack with the little bit of outboard gear we had was on the left, and the tape machine was probably on another table, and that's how we started out,
What do you feel like? What do you feel like has made it work for this long?
Well, initially we were the place that people could record, and not only could they record, but a big formula in the earlier days was to be able to put a cassette out.
Mm-hmm.
People weren't really putting records out at the point. They couldn't put out CDs. That was not available yet to like disc makers and all that to make your own CDs. So we had in-house cassette duplication. So we had a thing called the Punk Special. You could come in and record like 2 or 3 songs and put out a little EP for, I mean, very like $400
Mm-hmm.
or something like that, and get like 50 cassettes and stuff. And so bands were actually able to put records out, you know what I mean? And these records would have absolutely never gotten put out because a lot of bands didn't last very long, you know.
Yeah.
So all these records were coming out that would have never even come out because people wouldn't have had no place to record them, you know what I mean? So that's why the place in the early days was successful because, and then later certain genres like, you know, punk genres, hardcore and crust punk and stuff like that, we made a lot of like seminal records in the genre.
Yeah.
And these people found out they could make these crazy sounding records, noisy stuff and such, and there was nobody giving them any pushback on it. So one thing, we just don't give any pushback. If people want to do things a certain way, then we just do that. And if you're going to be doing a gospel record one day and a punk record the next day, and indie rock record the next day, you know, we don't have a genre at all. You know, most
or Dawn Staley's book.
Or yeah, Dawn Staley's book, or whatever. We just do, you know, we do stuff. We do state fair ads, jingles for the state fair, things like that. So I think most people that you see running studios these days, they kind of have the studios built around metal or indie rock or something like that. But we're a service-oriented place. So our genres that we deal with kind of float around. And all of a sudden I'll get a call from an old hardcore band that I hadn't done a hardcore record in like a year. And all of a sudden these guys will come down from Kentucky and want to record with the same guy that did all these seminal 90s hardcore records, and or crust records or whatever, and I'm happy to do it, you know, just as well as I'm happy to make a outlaw country record or do an old.
I remember Black Tusk when we did that video with Zach at New Brooklyn Tavern. They had been recording something in town, and that was a big deal having Black Tusk come and do that. Isn't that right?
Yes, Black Tusk. So Black Tusk is a part of that kind of sludgy Savannah scene.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened, we were the same thing for Savannah that we were Columbia. Savannah had no place to go.
Right.
Because you had all these sludgy bands, you know, like Kalesa and Baroness.
Kalesa was the other one I was trying to think
of.
Yeah,
Baroness and Black Tusk and a whole ton of others. So, you know, Philip Cope came in early on with his other band, and then he started, of course, they told all of the Savannah bands about us. So we had all these Savannah bands coming up, and we used to have all these Baltimore bands coming down, and certain like crust and sludge sort of bands used to come because they knew that's a friendly place. Now there's more specific genre-specific studios all over the place.
Yeah.
Now that people can just buy interfaces and more easily, and it seems like everybody's got a house with some extra space and all that.
Yeah.
You know, do house-based, you know, punk.
Well, what kind of effect has that had on your business? The shift to, and I think I remember maybe it was like Moby or somebody won Grammys from something he made in his bedroom, and everybody was freaking out. It was like 98 or 9, you know, where that happened. That shift happened a while back. What's the effect been on your business?
Well, you know, the whole business has changed. Like, say, when AKG or Neumann or somebody made a microphone, that microphone was made for professionals.
Right.
Now, who do they make microphones for? Novices.
Right.
You know, generally. Not that they don't still sell to professionals. I mean, you're using your microphones in a professional capacity.
That's right.
But you're not the market for these microphones. No. People recording and doing things at their house, that's who's buying the glut of all the equipment these days. So instead of all this big-time professional equipment, they're making stuff, you know, that's, you know, angled at non-professionals. So the whole industry is kind of gone that way, and a lot of these big studios that are still in business, they're still using old gear because the old gear is still better
because it's unique.
Yeah,
right?
it's better. Basically all the new gear is just copies of the old gear,
Right.
And oftentimes not as good a quality. So in a sense, the whole business is just headed toward that way. And of course, for us, we had to change the business quite a bit. One of the first things I started doing when I saw the writing on the wall was started teaching audio classes for Midlands Tech. So that gave me a stream of income because it used to be nothing but a bunch of weirdos were in this business, you know what I mean? And your parents didn't want you doing this. Your parents didn't want you playing music, because all they had to look at was Kiss and Black Sabbath and Aerosmith and the Rolling Stones, and they say, no.
Not very good examples for
this
children.
This is no good.
Yeah.
And that was my role models when I grew up, too, and I thought that's how things went. And then it's funny that I think Columbia band Hootie and the Blowfish is not that they partied any less than those bands, but they looked less scary.
Right.
And their music sounded less scary. So it's funny that a Columbia-based band, I think, had a big effect on, a new diversity of regular-looking people playing music, and all of a sudden the whole thing that only weirdos and outsiders were playing music,
Right.
kind of went away. And I think that whole thing is has just changed things a lot. But for me, obviously a lot harder to make a living as a studio owner. So you have to basically do what people need you to do. If somebody needs you to track their drums, well, you do the best job you can, track their drums, send them the files out, so the next person, whoever's going to mix the record or track the guitars, has something very nice to work with and it sounds really good.
Yeah.
You can't ever say, oh, I wish I was recording your whole record. Just be happy recording the drums. If somebody wants you to just record guitars or just do this or just do that, be happy that you have that gig and do the best job you can, and never start trying to steal the other person's gig. If you do a good job, that's what you need to do, not try to weasel.
And make good enough money on what you're doing so that you don't have to worry about taking it up. You just have to make the profit on the...
Yeah, and like if I master somebody's record and it comes in and it sounds bad, I'm not going to say, hey, these guys did a terrible job recording your record. That's bad business. I'm just going to, master their record and get it sounding as good as I can, and try to, to be sure everybody has a good feeling about things. Because one thing's very important, that say if there's a band and there's 5 band members or 4 band members or whatever, you need to be sure that when they leave the studio that everybody feels like they were heard. If they had a problem with whether it's a drummer or the bass player, even if their other bandmates won't listen to them, sometimes you need to be sure that these people are heard, so that they're not dissatisfied when they leave. If they have a stupid idea, well, entertain it. You know what I mean? Maybe it's not so stupid, and they feel so you don't have this 3 happy people and 2 disgruntled ones.
Yeah.
Sending disgruntled people out the door is one thing I've learned. I think if there's one trick I've learned is to be sure that everybody in each band has felt like they've been heard individually as far as what they are concerned about.
And I'll tell you one thing I remember, and this was, 25 years ago now. I think we did it in 2000 when we recorded at the Jam Room. Jay would be like, "That sounded like crap. Do it again." And I was like, okay. It took me a minute, to get used to that. But I was like, man, that's so helpful to have him say, no, you didn't do that as good as you could have done. Let's try it again. Or, let's like that coaching was like super important, for us, because we didn't know what we were doing. I mean, and John Hewitt was our guitar player, and he came in with a kind of a cheap guitar, and he didn't really have any good amps or anything. And so you had like a wall of amps that he could try. And it's the first time I'd ever seen an orange amp, other than in a Black Sabbath music video, and so I found all that to be extremely helpful. Do you still use the two? You have the 2-inch tape machine. Do you still use that?
No, it turned out we couldn't keep that serviced.
Yeah.
It's an older Studer machine. It was
Right.
an A800, which is a really. It's actually in a big studio in New York right now.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, there was no service techs in this area.
Yeah.
Even out of the, I had a guy come down who'd been servicing the machine for years from the Raleigh area, and he could no longer keep the machine running.
Wow.
Because the thing is, they quit making 2-inch tape machines back in the 80s.
Oh, sure.
They
Yeah.
don't make them anymore. So anybody's got a tape machine has got an old tape machine.
Right.
So the thing is, these things are wearing out that had never worn out before.
Right.
So, in the big hubs like, New York, LA, and probably Atlanta, there's
People that can service it.
people
Yeah.
that that's where all these machines are kind of course, Nashville too.
Yeah.
But there's people that can service these things. Back in the early days, I mean, you had to have service people. Like your tape machine went down, you had to close the doors.
Sure.
You know what I
Oh,
mean?
yeah.
You had to have people that could service your tape machine. Console, same thing. Your console had a problem, you were shut down. I mean,
Right.
now if anything breaks, you just get another one from whatever your gear dealer is. You
Yeah.
know.
Well, and imagine they make them to be repaired, or they make them easier to work on, I guess, or kind of less susceptible to that.
Well, yeah, there's a less moving parts. People don't even have consoles.
Right.
So if your interface just catches on fire, you can just, I'll call my friends at Front End Audio and say, hey, if you got one in stock. Of course, I don't use interfaces. I use separate converters and things like that. But for your average person recording, they're going to have an interface that's the kind of their
Plugs right
central point where all the signals go.
Right.
And they're disseminated from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, now everything's garden variety, and things are a lot simpler. Anybody could get a studio going these days. People used to buy like a tape machine and a console. They couldn't even make it work.
Yeah.
And then once you recorded a kick drum, if it was muddy sounding or whatnot, you couldn't fix that. There was no way to add a sample or process it enough to get it that bad sound. So many people started studios and they closed down almost immediately after because they couldn't make anything.
They realized how hard it is.
Yeah, they realized that that wasn't what they should be doing with their life.
Well, we run into it a lot in our business that, everybody's got a great video camera in their pocket, so why not use it, right? And our suggestion to people is definitely use it. Use it as much as you possibly can. When you're ready to move up from that, just let us know and we'll help, But that's it's got to be tough. Honestly, one of the questions I had for you, it's got to be tough working with musicians in business, right? Because I'm assuming the best business people aren't the musicians. What's that been like for what is that, almost 40 years? What's that been like working with musicians for this long?
Well, I guess I started out doing live sound, and that was a very clear-cut business. You did the gig. At the end of the gig, somebody handed you whatever you were getting paid.
And they budgeted for it, so it's
it was
give you whatever the budget is.
Never any question. It's like,
that's right.
Hey, I'm gonna do this for $75. At the end of the night, you got $75 or $40 or what? Those really early gigs were very low paying, as you can imagine. But then when I switched to recording, it's I was very accustomed to being a professional and providing professional services. So I didn't start out recording my friends at my house for free, and then that's difficult to transition from recording your friends for free to actually charging money.
Right.
So I didn't have that problem. I was already charging for my
clear
service.
with them from the beginning. So
100% of the money that I've made in my life since I was about 24 or so has been from audio. Made a little bit playing music in bands, but everything I've done to earn money to pay for my house payments, car, food, anything, zero income has come from anywhere other than audio related stuff. No family money, nothing like that. Like I said, we had absolutely nothing when we started out. Myself and most people I knew, we were on our own. We had raggedy vehicles. We were renting crappy apartments. We had nothing except for what little bit of musical equipment we had acquired. I, on that hand, had acquired quite an amount because I had been doing it hardcore since I was in my teens, you know.
Well, and I think a lot of the accessibility, I feel like a lot of the accessibility that people feel with it is that you go to, you know, if I'm a young band, 3 or 4 me and my friends, and my dad's going to give us $400 or $500 to record a record, you know, there's a lot of places where it doesn't feel accessible, but I feel like at the Jam Room it feels like they could walk in there and be treated like with respect and like it's gonna, you know, it's gonna work for them, you know.
Yeah, that's one thing that we don't have, that kind of floating level of. Some people have more respect than others. Mm-hmm. You have to learn that you get 13-year-olds coming in to the studio. Well, that's their record.
Yeah.
The 13-year-olds are now the boss.
Right.
Now, of course, you have to guide them through the process somewhat, but you are working for them. They are in control of how their record sounds, which is what the Jam Room's been all about, is you decide how your record is going to sound. We'll help you. Like, once you start playing, we'll listen to you play and say, oh, I thought you were doing this. This is a black metal band. I always thought this is a certain. There's all these subgenres of metal, and I don't even know all the subgenres.
Oh yeah, no, there's
but
number
these
of
guys started playing, and you hadn't really heard them play but a little bit, and you would say, "Is this black metal?" And they said, "Oh yeah." I'm like, "Okay." Luckily, I had worked on a couple of black metal records, and I knew that there was a certain sort of skewed fidelity that they were looking for, and then sometimes people might have to give me more guidance on what they're looking for. You know, you got sludgy stuff, you got speed metal, you got, you know, hardcore punk records, you got the genres. The number of genres have completely exploded. And not being a current music nerd, I don't know the names of even all the genres anymore.
And the thing is, like, rap has gotten a bunch of like subgenres in it now and all that stuff too, which didn't have. I mean, that wasn't necessarily a thing when I was listening to music in the 90s. Like, I don't remember there being a lot of subgenres to rap, like where there was a lot of subgenres to metal and punk and all that stuff. But it's got to be hard to keep up with. And I know for over the years I've known Dave, I guess, and then Zach and Steve Slavich, and like all of these guys who are just awesome, you know, engineers, have been drawn to work with y'all, you know, over the time. I wanted to ask, like, what makes a great record? What is it that, like, when people come in and you see them, how do you know it's going to be good when you see people?
Well, often I'm very surprised at what people do or don't like. I'll hear something and I think this is really great, and then it won't make a splash. So I think, you know, records that were really huge, that to me, I was just in the studio for 2 days or 4 days or whatever, say the Anti-Schism Abort the Soul record. That was, you know, that's Initial State. The band, it used to be Anti-Schism, changed some, I guess, bass players, and then there were Initial State. It was a new band, and Anti-Schism was a big deal. They were, you know, had a really crazy raw kind of sound. I mean, the type of screaming their vocals did was just a whole another level for me. But then I worked on, say, that Initial State record. Well, it was very noisy and feedback, and just, you know, and I did my best job I could to record this record, and these were people I'd known. They were friends of mine. The record gets put out, and all of a sudden, you know, I got people coming from Dallas to record because they have heard that record. I would have had no idea at all that this record would have been such a landmark album for a lot of genres of music that were just getting started at the time.
Yeah.
And that one record got me. I mean, that's why people were driving from Baltimore and all these other places,
right?
Because they heard that record. So, as far as what makes a great record, I mean, what's happening now, I guess, is that people are actually investing enough time. I started out making fast records, you know, where people would come in and do these one-day things or just one afternoon thing. And now, obviously, what's happening is records need a little more time put into them to sound good old analog recordings, they seemed to, you could do those a little more hurriedly, and they had a certain charm to them and sounded cool. But the more modern digital ones take a little bit more time to, record and
nuance
mix
them and get them into place.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, it's tougher and tougher to make a great record because all these formulas are out, and a lot of bands just follow follow formulas that have already been created. And I guess really a great record is when people are pushing those formulas or combining stuff from. I just had a band called Windley that was in. They were kind of, I guess, got a bit of a pop punk component, but all of a sudden they're throwing little pieces of old concept records from the 70s into the record, and it's like, I don't know if this is going to be popular or not, but it does have, where people are stirring the pot a little bit and trying to make something different rather than trying just to emulate.
Gotta love a good idea, even if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Well, aren't musicians rebels anyway?
Well, I mean, some are, yeah. Some are very much followers, right? And so it's interesting.
The Rebels, well, definitely look when you think about great records. These are records that diverge from the path.
And that's why Hootie was so popular. If you think about what happened when Hootie came out, it was so popular because it wasn't The Offspring and it wasn't Green Day and it wasn't Blink.
It wasn't cool either.
No, it wasn't cool. There was a bunch of dudes sitting around, frat guys sitting around jamming, right?
So did they record at the Jam Room? Who is the most famous band that has come through the Jam Room?
Well, I actually, way back when I was in that basement space, I think I recorded them once for $25. And I don't think it was even the original bass player. I remember it wasn't even the full original guys. And they had $25, and they were going to be on a media arts filmmaking or video project. Their song was going to be, and I recorded them for 20. I don't even know if they remember it, but it was. They came in and they left, and I just gave them a cassette. Was all I had to even give them at the end of the session. They took it and they used it, but I never did any of their records. Their first EP was done at a place in Raleigh. Yeah, but I've never been associated that much with pop records in general. So when I say a big record, some of the records I've worked on are very big records, but
okay, so
underground scene.
For the layperson, so when you say record, is that a song?
A record would
an
be
album
like an LP.
be like multiple?
Yeah. A record would be
an LP is 3.
LP was like 2 full sides of a record, like 40 minutes of music is kind of the modern standard. But the old records, they didn't hold typically quite that much. But
Now hold on. So were you recording on vinyl?
No,
when you started, or they've all been tape?
Yeah, everything was tape in the earlier years, and we switched over to being more digital in around 04. But we still had the tape machines, and we're going back and forth between tape and digital. Now, we do very little tape because a lot of my gear these days is geared toward making a digital record sound like a tape record that was recorded in the 70s. So I think one of my specialties is making records in the old school way. And having an ear for 70s rock and having a lot of the similar gear, and even my converters, the analog to digital converters that I use are Burls, and they are specifically made to sound like old Studer tape machines and Neve consoles and things like that.
And even when a band wanted a pressed record, it would be up to them to do it. So I know Inhumanity. Did Inhumanity record at your place? I don't remember.
I guess I did all the Inhumanity records but one. I think they recorded one somewhere.
It was on your wall for a little while.
The Jerry Lewis on the front. Yep. The Nutty Antichrist.
But they would press a record, and of course, I had and I was in the same boat as you're talking about, poor as dirt. My friend Marty was in Inhumanity, and I got to meet the rest of the guys through Marty, but I wanted to listen to the music, but I couldn't because all they had was the record. and there was no tape, there was no CD,
And no record player.
and I had no record player. So I hung the record on my wall. I didn't know what else to do with it because like I couldn't play it. And so, you know, but they would get impressed if they wanted to. It was just mainly because I know what we took away was a CD, but that was in 2000 or so.
Yeah, so at first, you know, we were handing out cassettes for masters, and then at a certain point, we got to the technology got to the point where you could actually create CDs in the studio. So we predate the ability to even make a CD.
Right.
Computers didn't come with CD drives in them, and certainly not writers.
Yeah, for a
they
long
might
time.
have readers in them, but you couldn't make. So the first thing that we got was this Marantz CD recorder, and it recorded in real time.
Yeah.
So you would mix down to a DAT machine, and you would dub the DAT over the CDs, and then you
Right.
could hand somebody a single CD.
Yeah.
And later, we ended up with the ability to duplicate CDs. But these things came along slowly, and they were crazy expensive. I think the first time we got a CD duplicator, it would duplicate 4 CDs at once. It was $3,000 or $4,000.
Oh, yeah.
And then the first CD recorder we had was like $2,500. So
Yeah.
everything back then, say just an 8-track ADAT machine, which was a crappy 8-track digital tape machine, those things were $2,200 at a deal. And, you know, and now
Yeah.
a really nice interface, that's what it costs, like about the same. So the amount of money it cost to set up a studio back then was just like,
Well, it's
ridiculous.
barrier to entry, right? Your barrier to entry used to be giant.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
To
people
be able
just-
to do it, and now it's not big at all.
both the expertise and hooking up and running the stuff was higher, and the amount of money was higher.
Treating the space, like making sure the space is soundproofed in a way that you can record in it. You know.
Yeah, you had to have some amount of treatment, but a lot of the early records we had really ridiculously poor sound treatment. But another thing about the money is, like, say, access to money was completely different back then. You know, I remember I bought a house in like '93, I think, and the house was only $50,000. You know what I mean?
Right.
But you barely had enough money to pay for that, and other things were the same. You couldn't whip out a credit card and get these things. You know what I mean? There was later on, people were getting loans, but I guess banks were giving out loans, but you had to have serious collateral and such to be able to get the loan. You maybe if you owned your building, they would probably then loan you the money to, you know, the $200,000 it would take to get a tape machine.
Yeah.
And all this other stuff.
Get outfit for it.
Yeah.
So I imagine over the years, with all of these punk rock and metal bands, hardcore bands coming through, you had some crazy stuff happen at the Jam Room. What's the craziest thing that you've had happen at the studio?
Well, crazy stuff kind of always happens, but you know, I thought about this ahead of time. I don't have that one story. I remember, I won't name the band, but there's this, like an old school kind of Sex Pistols-y punk band was in there one day, and I remember they started recording. A lot of times we would record for a day, and that was a punk record. And the record being sometime would be a 7-inch. A 7-inch would maybe be 2 or 3 songs.
Right.
A 7-inch record. If it was a full-length record, then that was,
8 or 10 sometimes.
Yeah, something like that. But I guess this was probably a punk record. And they started going next door to get steel reserves from the quick shop next door. And they were in there doing all their background vocals. So typically how you do the record with the band would play the songs live, and then you come back and sometimes the singer would then do the vocals, and then they go back and do the gang vocals where the whole band would, put on headphones and scream and yell out all the background vocals. Well, by the end of the day, I went out there and looked where they were doing the background vocals, and one of the guys had passed out, and he was just laying on the floor under the microphone, and the other 3 guys were still going at it.
Yeah, those were the days, man. Those were the days.
But crazy stuff has happened. One time, a band was crashing at the studio, and a guy ended up with a collapsed lung.
Oh gosh.
And get taken to the hospital.
Yeah.
I've started a record one time, and we were going to record a record on 2 weekends, and the guy that was the bass player / singer of the band passed between the 2 weekends.
Oh God! So what do you do?
No refund.
That's right.
That's I mean,
you have to have some weird policies.
And these are my friends that I've been recording for years, and it's like, of course, you're just struck by it. And it's like you can't believe. But then the band has got to decide.
Yeah, do we record the record?
Do we finish the record or not? I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg too, as far as stuff that would happen and life happens.
We when we were recording ours, our drummer, which we've had a lot of conversations about the drummer that we have. This is kind of a hilarious story, but it's sort of an inside baseball type story. You wouldn't really get it unless you really understood what we were talking about. But Jay had some opinions about our drummer, but our drummer left us at a gig so we were playing at New Brooklyn Tavern, and I'm not going to say his name on the podcast, but he knows who he is. We were playing at New Brooklyn Tavern, and he just didn't show up. And so we're all loaded up on stage. We had gone to the practice space to get his kit because he was working. He said, I'll come right after work and I'll be there. Just go get my kit and bring it up. We had set the kit up on stage. It was time for us to start going, and he is not answering his phone, and he's not there. And so we had already recorded one session at the jam room on our songs, and then he just doesn't show up for a gig. So we're like, crap, what do we do now? Like, we got half a record with this guy on it that is not showing up. And so we didn't hear from him for like a week. We didn't even hear from him. He didn't call and say, sorry, I can't make it. He just didn't show up. And so we actually made up at the jam room. We had another session scheduled, and he showed up for the session, almost like nothing ever happened. So we had to go into that little room that you had and kind of work it out. and then we recorded the rest of the record, regardless of what Jay thinks about his kick drum playing. But it was like one of those things where there was real band drama going on, right in the middle of recording.
That's happened. Yeah, I've definitely had screaming matches and things like that. And you just have to do the best you can to just sit there and be chill while people are, working out their problems and stuff. But
you're still getting paid by the hour.
That's right. Do you want to take the hour to work it out? Then go work it out. But
a lot of people, this is their art and the most important thing in their lives.
Oh yeah.
And also not that people might be partaking or whatever might make it worse.
Yes.
But these are creative people, and some of the most creative people obviously can have differences of opinion.
Yep.
And they might put these things on hold, but then it's time to record this song. Well, you can't. If you got a problem with how the song is going, you got to fix it before it gets recorded. So a lot of times they're just at the studio.
Oh yeah.
And there's
that's all part of it. It's
heated,
writing the song sometimes.
Heated conversation, and you just have to. That's another thing that to realize that here you are. This is a lot of people. This is the most important thing they're doing in their entire life.
Right.
Is this music that you're helping them to record right now?
Right.
Are you like my old band Tempest Fugit? That guy, I'm sure he did the best he could, but we never put a record out. If that record would have sounded good, we would have had a record out, and it would have been the first metal record put out in Columbia. Period.
Mm-hmm.
But due to the fact that it did not sound good, we did not put it out. So our dreams, and that's all we wanted to do. We worked crappy jobs in banks and grocery stores. Nobody had a good job, and all we wanted to do was make a record and put it out. And we couldn't do it because the guy that was doing it just was not up to the task. And you got to either be that guy that's helping people do this, not the person that, like that person was, help us do that.
Yeah.
And I've even been recording bands where they said, we're gonna break up soon, but we want to go ahead and record our music.
Right.
And do such a good job on the record that they decide not to split up and continue as a band.
Yeah.
So you want to be the place where they come if the band's having a rough time to make the bands sound so good that they feel good about it, because a trip to the studio is often a make or break. Say for instance, Stretch Armstrong, they're one of the most popular bands from Columbia ever, and a lot of people would think that's some of the most popular records I've done would be Stretch Armstrong, and they had done a few recordings, and they weren't up to snuff for the type of sound that Stretch needed.
Yep.
And the first, and I actually, I went back with Scott Dempsey a ways. I forgot how Scott and I even knew each other, but we had known each other, and so they came in to record, and we made a record, and it actually all of a sudden got them their first semblance of a record deal, and they were able to move forward a band. But after their third recording didn't come out good, they were probably doing good to survive the first two.
Yeah, that's right.
But they that record came out, and then I probably did one more record for them, and then all of a sudden they got signed to a real record label, and then the record label, paid for them to go to a more big time studio somewhere. But you want to be the people that are helping, even if you're not going to say. Baroness did some records at the studio. That's another Savannah band, and Philip Cope had brought those in, and that's when he was just starting to produce records. But Baroness came in, and they did a couple of smaller records, and they did a full length that Phil produced, and then after that they pretty much were signed to a bigger record deal, and been, I don't know where they record now.
So would you consider yourself a music producer, or just like a sound guy?
I'm not primarily a producer, so that's a whole thing too. Is there's two ways of looking at recording people. Is that if you come to my studio, I'm going to give you the sound I think you need. That would be a producer, which I am not, because I probably in a sense co-produced the records with the bands, but I don't step into that
artistic
area. But a really popular thing these days is for somebody to consider, like, well, if you hire me to do your record, I'm producing it, and you're going to do everything the way I tell you, because I know how records are supposed to sound. My name is going on it, and you're doing what I say when you come to the studio.
That was going to be my next question. You never wanted to get into the actual publishing of the music?
Publishing's a whole different thing. Producing is just being the overall creative control of the project. So that's why record labels would hire a producer, to be so sure that they would go to the studio to be sure that everything was going to work, that the engineer was up to snuff, that the studio itself was up to snuff, that the band showed up, and that their music didn't sound like crap. Like, say, for instance, Bob Ezrin, before he recorded the Alice Cooper band, the original one, their record sounded crazy. And all of a sudden he came on board, produced their record, and
polished it up.
So the producer is the one that just keeps the whole thing from going into the wastebasket, basically. So I'm there to keep it from going into the wastebasket, but I'm also not there to tell people how their record is supposed to sound. I'm supposed to sit there and listen to them play, and then I'd say, oh, this is what they're looking for. And if they don't like what they're hearing, I'll say, that's too much distortion on the guitar. I say, okay, well, let's dial the gain back and get something that you like. Or they might be playing something that's so distorted you can't hear what they're playing. I'm saying, man, I can't make out what you're playing at all. So we got to figure out some way to make this work, where you can be comfortable playing, but it's just not going to be a sheet of noise where nobody can hear you.
Producing would be a lot too, where you're having influence over the songs. So you're saying
that too.
This song should maybe go this direction, or let's cut this chorus short and go to a bridge or whatever it is. And I think that is a whole other kind of like mindset.
That was you were never interested in doing something like that?
Well, I don't. If, like, say, I'm more of a service provider in the sense that I provide the service of recording the bands that come in. If they want me to produce it, sometimes I can step more into that role of producing it, but that's also not what a lot of people want. Like Inhumanity didn't meet. They had this crazy idea how their records should sound, and it was not proper at all. If I made it sound like a regular record, it would not have been successful. So I did a lot of records that were supposed to sound out of the box and weird, and the genres were being made up right then and there, so I had to kind of just be present to capture it. I guess Steve
And
Albini.
shout out to Chris Bickle. I want to have him on the podcast.
Steve Albini, who unfortunately just recently passed, he was a big proponent. He's a popular producer of indie rock records and all sorts of popular records that everybody's familiar with. But he was a fan of capturing what the band actually did, so that whether it's Nirvana or the Pixies or whatever it might have been, that they sound like they sound and not like this stamped out, standardized thing. We all heard a lot of records that just sound like standardized stuff, like, say,
Bob Rock.
Yeah. Like, I listen to some really good bands, but I can't really listen to them because they have such, like, say, a band, say, like the Donnas or something like that. They sound, a lot of their records sound like this very 90s sound that you heard on a bunch of other records. You listen to their music and it's good, but it's like, this is the exact same drum sound and formula of recording that I heard on all these other records. And while it probably did good for their overall popularity, I don't think it was good for their staying power, because it just has a bit of a generic, where another, say, if you're looking at female bands like L7 or something like that, was kept a little raunchier. And to me, it aged a little bit better. So, and I have a lot of, other people that I know that produce records in this area. I would not want my band that I played in to sound like that, because it sounds a little too slick, a little too produced. And that's why it's also great to have other engineers working at the studio. If they're looking for that, if you want to sound a little edgier, a little beefier, a little more like a retro styles, that's what I'm really best at. So especially being older, I don't obviously keep with these modern trends. So I have younger engineers at the studio. You have Zach Thomas, Zach Bingham, you got Moses. We're just talking about Philip Cope still producing, some metal records occasionally.
Yeah.
And even Steven Slavers came back and did a record
Nice.
A little while back. So we have,
Steve became a realtor, by the way. So you might know him from that if you saw him.
Yeah, he didn't. He had long hair like this. So,
he was.
He doesn't have the long hair anymore.
He was a long-haired golfer. He was like the only one I've ever seen. He would come into the studio like in full golf gear with a long hair to produce a metal record. It was it was an interesting.
Yeah, he liked metal and golf and bowling.
Yeah. I mean, it was just an interesting dude. Still is an interesting dude.
I got another question, because did your ear for the different sounds and the different instruments and how things are supposed to come together, did that evolve and happen over time, or did you just kind of naturally have that gift to be able to hear something off and be able to adjust it, and then with that and kind of enjoy the recording aspect of it?
Well, it definitely took time, and the thing that we didn't have here in Columbia, there was no place where you could go learn to record. They weren't going to, the few studios that were around, in my mind, they weren't turning out records that I wanted to emulate the sound of. And they also didn't take in employees or interns. There's no way to learn. And there was really not a lot of people to learn from. So it was a bit of a slow process to get started in recording, since we didn't come from a larger market where we could go and learn these things. So I had to learn by doing live sound. And that was, of course, the good thing about live sound, I used to work at Rockefeller's and places like that. So, and you would do sound for a band like Bad Brains or Suicidal Tendencies or something like that. Well, they would have their touring sound engineer come in. They would mix the main band, but you would mix the opener, and they would give you a thing and tell you a list where how they wanted the stage mic'd up, and you could watch them and learn from them. So for live sound, I had these other pro engineers to watch. I did not. Every time we had a pro engineer come in to engineer at the studio, that was great. We had this guy Dave Leonard come in to work on a Daniel Howard record one time, and he had worked on all sorts of huge records. I think he even worked on Prince records and things like that, John Cougar and stuff like that. And to watch a fellow like that work, you learned a lot. But, you know, just even how to tune drums and how to get good sounds, that was very tough at first. But I could do it well enough from my live sound experience to make records that people liked. And considering how, in retrospect, how little I knew then, I listened back to those records and they sound pretty cool. But I really kind of just barely did know what I was doing at the time. And luckily they came
Fake
out.
it till you make it.
Well, yeah, we were working hard, and I guess if you looked at their other options and listened to other people that were recording punk records in this area, I mean, the ones we were doing sounded much better.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, there was always these breakout records that you would do that sounded better than the ones you'd been doing before.
Yeah.
Like there was this live Queers record I did one time. That was just a good record, and they just came and played their set and left. You know, and we just mic'd it up, and they actually had about 20, 30 kids sit around watch them in the studio on that green shag carpet.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's funny. The Queers Suck This album was recorded so far back that it had the green shag
That's crazy.
carpet on the floor, you know.
Well, one of the other things that you probably don't know about Jay is he is a great bass player, and played primarily bass, right? You played guitar sometimes, right?
Yeah, I can play certain sorts of stuff on guitar, but I'm not really consider myself a guitar player. But
right.
all I really wanted to do was play bass. I didn't really want to record or work as an audio engineer. I wanted to be a bass player. But at a certain point, maybe when I was getting in my later 20s and on into my early 30s, you just start, you know, the band things just weren't working out. You know, your band members would decide that they wanted to do something else, or you realized that some of the people you were playing with, you know, just weren't in it for the long haul, or just were only so good, or were more interested in the party aspect of it than they were, you know, playing music. And you realize that I pretty much need to kind of go solo for my...
Got to figure out what to do other than...
Exactly. And I was becoming more and more in demand as, you know, as a recording engineer. And back then, I used to still do live sound while I was, when I wasn't working, recording a band, I would be out doing live sound, because anything to make a buck back then, to try to you buy more equipment and upgrade the studio, get real carpet, whatever.
Jay was in a band that hired me as a singer.
Oh.
I say hired, like with the quotes. But Marty Fort, who was playing guitar in that band, had seen my band play, and we did a Judas Priest song, and they were putting together a tribute band to Judas Priest, and they knew I could sing it. So they had me come in and jam with them one time, because I guess you lost your singer or something. Quit or something happened.
You came in when the band. You were the only person to really sing in that band.
Oh, okay.
There was nobody before. They had some auditions. A couple of people showed up, but Bill was able to easily sing the Rob Halford stuff. But I think the downfall of that band was just the fact that there was not a market for that.
No,
it was way ahead of the the band could have been successful these days as a tribute band. But I was not interested. I did it because I was a friend of Marty's.
Yeah.
And I was not really interested in being in a tribute band.
Well, that bass,
level.
the bass parts in Judas Priest are not super interesting either.
Yeah,
so.
You're basically playing the same as the guitar.
You're the root but they brought me in to jam with them one time just to see if it would work, and they're like, "All right, cool. Could you do the show?" And I'll go, "I don't know, when's the show?" And they say next Friday or Saturday or whatever it was. So I had a week, right? And so I was not a Judas Priest fan when I got hired to this. We had done the one Judas Priest song in my other band, but I wasn't a fan. I didn't grow up listening to them. And they had, I mean, it was 15, 16 songs in that first set.
Yeah, it was
right?
the old stuff too, like Victim of Changes.
It was fun. It was exciting. It was all that. I mean, Green Manalishi and all that stuff from the 70s. Never heard it once in my life. And so we can, and I think when we practiced, we did You Got Another Thing Coming, and we did like a couple of the Judas Priest songs I knew. And so they're like, all right, well, here's the 15 songs. Gig is next Saturday. And so we practiced probably every day that week. So I went to Myrtle Beach for my job, and I knew there was a biker outfitter place in Myrtle Beach. that had all the,
Oh
like,
yeah,
the
that
leather
place on
stuff.
the way to the beach. I remember that place.
Yep, and
Yeah.
it was called Thunder Road or some
Yeah.
Harley sounding thing.
I totally forgot about that spot.
And I took a picture of Rob Halford and I said, I need to do this. And the lady was like, "What?" And I was like, I'm not riding a motorcycle. I'm going to be in a Judas Priest tribute band, and I need this stuff." And I showed her the picture. So she hooked me up with the hat with the chain on it, and
That's where that picture came from.
Yeah, the leather vest and the chaps. I got some leather chaps, and I had the wristband that went all the way wrist to elbow with the spikes on it, and I got all that from the same place. It was like a one-stop shop, and so the next weekend we played the gig, and I literally had lyric sheets laid out on the stage in front of me because the life of me couldn't remember 14 songs.
Pre-iPad era.
Pre-iPad, pre-anything, right? I
Yeah.
just had lyric sheets laid out on the stage, and we pulled it off. I don't know how we pulled it off. I still watch videos. There's still a video floating around from that show.
Oh yeah.
It's like shocking that
Where
I was
was
able.
that show?
New Brooklyn.
Oh okay.
Yeah, and we packed New Brooklyn Tavern. Like, it was wall to wall. And the problem is that we would go to, whatever, Chapel Hill or Wilmington, and there'd be 8 people that would come see us. And of course, can't make it a whole lot of money if there's only 8 people coming to see you. But like, every time we played in Columbia, we had a decent crowd. We did that for a year, right? Well, I mean, it was a while.
Actually, I left at some point. I think did Scott.
Yeah, Richard Shearer came in and played.
Is that who played?
Yep, Scott
after
Kimmel
me?
played a couple times, and there was a couple of bass players that came in and out, but we had a lot of fun. We traveled a little bit, to do it, but yeah, those are the good old days. And now he's playing in a Elvis band,
Sweet.
called Bernie Love. He's a hunk of Bernie Love,
Mm-hmm.
and playing a lot, right? I mean, y'all are.
Well,
I'm always seeing Patrick.
we
I
just
guess.
play a couple of times a year, actually, because we just want to keep that kind of special around town, and we played out of town a couple of times.
Yeah. Well, the singer for that band is Patrick Baxley, who's a fantastic singer, one of my favorite guys in town, and so they do a great show. Actually played in Vegas as an Elvis band, which is was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was cool.
So
Take it to
how did you
Vegas.
get that? I'm sure that's a Marty Fort thing.
Yeah, that had to do with the conference, one of Marty's conferences.
Nice. But to be able to play in Vegas as Elvis, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah,
Just
when we were staying at the Golden Nugget too. So that was like
it's like
Ground zero.
Fremont Street, Vegas, like not.
Like the very intersection you always see in
Yeah.
all the pictures of Vegas. That's where we were sleeping. Like
Wow,
right in
that's so cool.
That's nice.
That's where our rooms were.
Elvis has never made it close to Vegas,
No.
but we do what we can. we make it through. Well, Jay, this has been great, man. Thank you so much for coming on. We always end up the podcast with 5 questions. So here's your 5 questions
All right.
for you. And I think when I say punk, I say one thing, and you say punk, you mean something else. What's your favorite punk record?
My favorite. I'm supposed to say something other than my favorite. Punk
No,
record?
I'm saying whatever your favorite punk record is. So
His punk might mean
My
something.
punk is very
and
different.
your
okay.
punk might
Yeah,
mean
that's right.
something.
mine is probably very popular.
And mine is definitely way different than.
Mine is very popular and whatever the kids are talking about. But what's your
I guess
favorite?
the Pistols, the Wind Pistols record. Never mind the Bullocks is probably the one that always comes to mind.
Nice.
Although my first punk record I bought was the New York Dolls album.
Nice. That's great. Yeah, Jay and I played a punk show together on the 1st of June.
Nice.
Among 16 other musicians, but Jay was in one band, I was in another band. But yeah, so I played a Buzzcocks song. Was not my favorite punk record, but whatever. It was fun to do. Favorite TV show of all time?
Wow, TV show. That I haven't really thought about that in a while. I
We
don't
used to say sitcom if it helps to narrow it down. What's your favorite sitcom?
favorite sitcom. Oh man, that would be a really tough one. I didn't think about that. Cause I don't watch. Let's go for the young ones.
Oh, Young Ones. Okay,
Yeah.
nice. That's a good one. It came on MTV late at night. It's the only reason I ever saw it.
Yeah, I can't think of anything any better than that. You know?
Yeah, that's great.
I didn't even know
My
where that came
introduction
from.
to British television was anything that came on MTV late at night. It was a weird thing that used to happen in the late '80s, I guess, right when that was out.
I guess so. I just saw a picture of them this last
Yeah.
week.
Yeah, I saw that too. I think.
Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah,
Barely could recognize them.
I'm telling you.
All right, favorite dessert.
Favorite dessert? I have been doing tiramisu a fair amount lately.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
As I get older, I can't have tiramisu after like 6 o'clock because it'll keep me up. Used to be I could have caffeine whatever time of day and it would be no problem. That's awesome. What would your last meal be on death row?
Last meal. That's a tough one. I guess bibimbap.
Ooh, okay, very cool. Korean food,
Yeah.
right up Stephanie's.
It would have to come from the Blue Cactus though.
Oh right, which you can't get anymore.
Yeah. So
See, this is another way you avoid execution. You
Yeah.
say, I need bibimbap from the Blue Cactus, and it doesn't exist. So what do?
I had some
Last
the other
meal's
day.
a courtesy, so
I had some the other day and it didn't have that hot bean paste they used
Oh,
to
yeah.
have, and it just wasn't the same. You know.
Well, they got a place in Harbison now called Bibimbox,
Really.
which is like a Moe's for Korean food, and they have that paste that you can put into the. So you might want to try it. It might be close. Who knows? You know, all comes from the same place. All right.
What's your favorite concert you've ever been to? Do you have one that sticks out?
I have 3, but I'd say I'll go for AC/DC on the Highway to Hell tour.
Whoa.
There you go.
Nice.
The real deal.
Bon Scott, like the real thing.
Yeah, probably next to that would be Rush on the Hemispheres tour.
Oh, nice. I saw Rush in 2002, so I went with my band. I was the only non-Rush fan, and you should. I'm not a Rush fan.
This is the second time we've had this conversation.
Have
on
we
the
really
podcast.
had talked about that before?
Just the last one with
Rush is one of those bands where if you're not a bass player or a drummer or a guitar player, I guess, but like singers just don't attach to Rush for some reason. It's like because of Geddy Lee's voice. It's like
Yeah, that's the only tour I think I would have ever. I was lucky enough to see that one. That one was really just kind of
yeah.
unbelievable. Well,
Hemispheres,
also the
though.
situation too. There was it was at the township, and that was the scene where you would walk in. They were wanding everybody.
Yeah.
And right before they would wand you, there were these huge boxes, like toilet paper boxes, or huge cardboard boxes that everybody could throw stuff in.
Oh wow.
And people just throwing sacks of weed and liquor bottles and
Oh, yeah, just to get
knives and just piles of stuff because that was
Confiscating it before you get in the door.
79, so
Oh,
it was
yeah.
They're
They're probably still smoking in there, so it's probably like a cloud of smoke hanging over the.
But I had never seen where they just had these boxes so people could just have a last minute to ditch their contraband before they got searched going in.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Jay, thank you so much for doing this, man. It was great to talk to you.
It was great fun, man.
Yeah, good to catch up.
All right, well, thanks, guys.
Thank you.